Hello and welcome. My name is Maren Sakri. I lead demand generation for Evolv Technologies. Thank you for watching. This is our 9th webinar in the Think CX Digital Leaders Tell All series. Today we focus on a look back at key digital experience trends that shaped 2020. If you have any questions, please ask in the message area. If we don't have time to address live, we certainly will respond through email after the live event. I'm eager to hear the trends our two speakers will be sharing today. Let me first introduce our digital experts. David J. Neff is an e-commerce test and learn consultant, author with 3 published books, a speaker and nonprofit expert. You checked the box in every one of those. He currently works as the VP of data-driven consulting practice at Clearhead. They were acquired by Accenture Interactive. He also works with Fortune 1000 brands on the customer impact of e-commerce, digital strategy, and building test and learn cultures. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Michael Scharf is the CEO of Evolv, which is an AI-driven solution for digital growth optimization that serves the best experience to each audience every time. Michael brings over 2 decades of digital commerce and retail experience to the table. He's held leadership roles at some of the most well-known retailers in North America, including Sears Canada, Toys R Us, Staples, and Best Buy. Outside of Evolv, Michael serves as an advisor to a number of retail-related technology companies, including Shopkick, Retail Next, RubaCloud, and others, and invests in several startups. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Michael. Eager to hear the conversation.
Thanks, Maren, and thank you, David. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today, and thanks to everyone for joining us. So let's dive right in. Okay, so today we're going to discuss 5 trends that we feel are shaping the digital experience. First up is the accelerated use of AI across all touchpoints. According to a recent McKinsey study, 61% of all high-performing companies have increased their investments in AI amid the COVID-19 pandemic. This report has a lot of great perspectives in it, and we'll share a link after the meeting to this report and some of the others that we referenced throughout the presentation today. Let's start the conversation by talking a little bit about Levi's. They began making investments in AI before the pandemic in order to get a better handle on how and when to run promotions. These investments in digital technologies, specifically AI and predictive analytics, allowed Levi's to react quickly and decisively as consumers switched to the e-commerce channels in droves earlier this year. The ability to respond quickly and their pre-existing digital investments is a key attribute that we've seen in other high-performing companies during 2020. In one example, a campaign that Levi's ran in May throughout Europe was launched using customer information gleaned from an AI model that they had developed, and they wound up driving sales that were 5 times higher than the similar time during 2019. In addition, in order to meet growing demand, they began fulfilling orders not just with merchandise from their fulfillment centers, but also from their stores. Prior to the COVID crisis, their CFO said it would have taken weeks or months to work out the logistics for such a move. But as the pandemic rolled across the country, Levi was able to accomplish this shift in just a matter of days. It quickly launched curbside pickup in 80% of its roughly 200 US-based stores. David, what are you seeing in terms of AI investments and outcomes from some of the companies that you've been working with?
Yeah, it's a great time for this. I think that I mainly see maybe 3 cases, right? Number one is just really simple, non-complicated usage, chatbots for support, kind of, people land on your site, they have a question, how do I deflect some calls and put that in a chat? But how do I make that chat intelligent enough to answer your question without just then requiring another person to jump in, because, you're kind of defeating the purpose of having that person jump in. So I think what we're seeing now is, yes, the technology exists, the vendors are interesting, let's go do it. But if I really want to give you an order status update, that might be a little complicated. There might be a couple of systems, some supply chain in there. So people have the front end, but I think the back end to actually tell the AI what the information is that to actually answer someone, everyone still seems a little behind on that, right? I don't know if you've seen that or you've heard a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's been a challenge in retail for decades where there's a huge amount of data, but figuring out how to configure that data and use it in an intelligent way is still a challenge. Getting all of the consumer data, the website data, your inventory information, all in a usable format that the systems can then actually process and do something with continues to be a big challenge for retailers.
I think the second thing to me is obviously what you guys are involved in as a business, and that is also just basic optimization. How do I make this an actual customized, almost one-to-one journey that the customer is experiencing? And how do I understand patterns and the data using AI and machine learning, maybe some natural language processing in ways that a team of analysts could never do, right? And I think there's this overhype still, unfortunately, in news and media that is AI is coming to replace you. AI is coming to, do what you can never do. And I think we're seeing the opposite of that, right? We're saying, you know what, this sits alongside us and helps us understand large data sets that we never could, and then take some action. And the take some action part, I think, is helped by, obviously a lot of that data and machine learning, but not replacing anyone. So it's funny because that makes a good headline, right, Michael? Is that it's coming to replace us all, but we know in the business that's not the truth.
Yeah, we've certainly seen exactly that. The platform that we have allows companies to try, orders of magnitude more experiments and optimization journeys with their customers, which you can never do manually. But you still need people to develop the strategies and the ideas. You need to interpret results, and you need to decide which of these things you want to roll out at scale, not just let the machine continue to operate. So yeah, they definitely go hand in hand. I think robotics presents a little different challenge in terms of human replacement, but I think AI, from a business perspective, clearly creates a lot more insight and data and helps customers, really use that data to drive better outcomes, which is what we're focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. I think, with those headlines and just the general sentiment around that, especially robotics, to your point, we've seen big box retailers that have said, you know what, we could actually have some automation of machinery that's maybe scanning shelves and determining stocks, out of stocks. And that's all the machine's doing. But we've seen that media hype and other things kind of make some of those retailers be like, you know what? This makes sense. It works good, but it's making our employees nervous.
Yeah.
Our retail folks are not ready to have machines doing this type of work, or machines in the stores, or our customers aren't comfortable with that robotics technology. And so we've seen maybe, one step forward, maybe not two steps back, maybe just one step back.
Great.
It's interesting to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on now to our second trend. And this is the rapid growth of mobile adoption and consumer-focused solutions. So we've seen rapid growth in mobile commerce, for going on 10 years now. But according to the latest App Annie forecast, due to the COVID pandemic, mobile app adoption accelerated by 2 to 3 years. And they expect consumer spending across iOS and Android devices will grow in excess of 25% year over year in 2020. COVID has forever changed the way in which consumers act with brands, and in a good way. Customer experience is really at the center of this. In their Future of CX report, PwC surveyed 15,000 customers and found that 1 in 3 customers will leave a brand they love after just one bad experience, and up to 92% will completely abandon a company after 2 or 3 negative interactions. This has enormous implications for brands and their ability to build engaging experiences that meet and exceed customer expectations. There are a few trends that really highlight some of the associated trends along with this. By far the biggest this year, due to COVID, has been the rise in delivery apps, online ordering, expanded delivery options, and new pickup options for consumers, as well as consumption across multiple channels. David, let's talk about Target a little bit. They have a long history of putting their guests first, regardless of platform or shopping experience, and they've invested heavily this year in same-day services and the ease of contact-free pickup, allowing customers to get products in as soon as an hour. And according to their COO, their multi-channel guests spend significantly more than their single channel customers. When I was running digital at Toys R Us, we saw exactly the same behavior, going back over 10 years now, and that led us to heavily invest in our omni-channel capabilities at the time. He also shared some research that showed that after guests try their drive-up pickup service, they see a nearly 30% increase in overall spending, including an increase in conventional in-store shopping. And I believe they were one of the first customers that actually experimented with curbside pickup all the way back in 2017. David, are you seeing similar trends in other large players, and how do you think these are going to play out in the coming years? Are these, permanent changes to customer behavior? Might we see some of these, kind of revert back to normal shopping behaviors?
I do feel it's a permanent change in behavior. I feel depending on the demographic is really how you would split that data up, right? Let's say 60% of people from a certain age range will continue this behavior, and I think 40% of folks will actually be like, I miss going inside of a store, and I do want to browse, I do want to look at things. And I think the other interesting thing that we are having a lot of discussions with retailers and grocers in particular, because you can imagine this was a whole scale change for grocers. Grocers were just now being like, Instacart. Am I friends with them? Am I going to build my own? Am I not friends with them? Where's the data going? What does the data look like? How much of that customer data am I giving up? And now they've said, okay, we're all in on that. And we're having to think heavy, like, do we build our own version of that? Do we not build our own version of that? So it's been super interesting. I also just think grocery in general is sometimes behind other sectors of retail because, they don't have to think about it as much. People need groceries. You show up at a grocery store and you shop, right?
Yeah.
So it's been super interesting to me to see grocers, and I know we'll talk about this later a little bit, just wholesale change with the store actually being closed. And how do I add a drive-through to my grocery store, right? How do I add DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats? How do I work with all these people? And, I have several friends that own restaurants in Dallas and in Austin as well. And they were thinking about that 2 years ago with Uber Eats and DoorDash. But now those small businesses, those same problems are being thought about by these large retailers. And I think, Michael, you would probably agree. A lot of people are just behind the ball on omni-channel in general, right?
Yeah, I think grocery is a great example. They've really been laggards in adopting online shopping. They've created a window of opportunity for companies like Amazon and others to really come in. And I think COVID certainly kicked them in the butt. And I think we're seeing an enormous investment now of large scale grocers and even, independent and locals and trying to figure out how do they handle online shopping? How do they handle delivery? Interestingly, we were talking to a number of these companies earlier in the year and, working with them on trying to think about customer experience and how do they create better digital experiences.
Yeah.
And when COVID hit, they actually all paused and said, our biggest challenge right now is just figuring out how do we get food to people. We know our experience needs a lot of work, but first we've got to get the logistics worked out. And we're starting now to see those companies, now that they've worked out some of the kinks in the operations, think about how do they create better experiences. And, this Target here is a great example. They have a lot of different options for how customers can engage with them, whether it's in-store pickup, ship to store, ship to home, create shopping lists in the stores. And it creates a lot of complexity in the shopping experience for the customers. And this is another example area where AI can really be helpful to try to experiment and understand which behaviors customers really are adept at, which options to present when in the journey, and how do you help them, really get the best out of it for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, what other industries, David, maybe digital banking or some others that you see are really, accelerating their adoption of digital experiences and focusing on, finding new ways to engage customers?
It is interesting too, and this is a personal anecdote, but just refinancing my house, right, in the middle of all this and going through that process, I do think, to your point, banking, which doesn't really have a reason to change often, right? You have to go apply for a loan. Here's what loans look like post 2008 financial crisis. Here's the information we need. But I think even in my process of refinancing my home, and then also being a hippy-dippy Austin person thinking about solar and getting a solar loan, what I've seen is that drive towards actual customer experience. when I did it 6 years ago, super manual, go to the bank, sit on hold, talk to 12 people. This time, hey, this is your refinance portal. Upload these 12 documents. The machine's actually going in and being like, you uploaded the wrong one, Mr. Neff. Here's what we're looking for. You got a red dot instead of a green dot next to that document you uploaded, and actually maybe somewhat explaining why it was the wrong document. We're still getting there. But I've just seen that wholesale transformation of, you know what, we have to mirror Target a little bit, right? Yeah. Target, Amazon, Nike, these customer experience leaders trickles down to all these other things. Just like you said, you could be at Wegmans, grocery store, and you have to at least be thinking a little bit about what's Kroger doing, or an Albertsons, or a Tesco in the UK. And maybe you can't get there just yet, but like, how are you taking those small steps? And I think, to your point and my point in the work that I do every day, which is helping people process technology and culture with experimentation and e-commerce teams, that is an experiment. What should be in that flow? What should the customer experience? How do we roll that out? What does that look like? And I think people like Target, people may say, I never can get to the Target level, but yes, you can. All Target's doing is running a series of experiments based on customer problems and hypotheses.
Yeah, and I think that idea of learning cross-industry is really important. There are some great companies out there doing really innovative work, and there's no reason those same experiences and the ideas that they're using can't be tried and actually effective in other channels as well, and other vertical industries. So that's a great point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is the rapid adoption of new business models, as well as the ongoing consolidation in some key markets. So nearly 60% of retail square footage in the United States was forced to close temporarily due to the COVID crisis, according to a recent Deloitte study. And the pandemic has forced brands to really think differently about partnerships and, how they expand and get customers to engage with them. Retailers and consumer products competitors continue to expand outside of their traditional revenue models to accelerate growth and meet the changing demands of consumers today. And some really interesting examples of this have been Target's partnership with Ulta, Kohl's doing some really innovative stuff, partnering with both Sephora and Amazon, and even The Body Shop partnering with Uber Eats around the country in a few locations. What's curious to me is, how do these partnerships affect these brands long term, on both sides of the equation? I'd love to get your perspectives on that. And, what are some of the drivers for companies making these bold moves into new channels and partnerships?
Yeah, Kohl's and Amazon is interesting because I think Kohl's has started to release a little bit of that data in some of their quarterly reporting and in some of the other metrics. But I feel if I could fast forward 3 years from now and see the actual results of all of that, right? I think some of these are just kind of PR worthy stunts. One I'll call out was, I think it was a Halloween, those pop up like Halloween Express and Spirits had teamed up with Instacart. And I was kind of like, well, what are you ordering your costume last minute to get delivered? Are they delivering your fog machine? What exactly is that? More about the PR of Spirit Halloween and Instacart than it is the actual outcome. So I'm kind of fascinated to see it, but I also totally get it. I think it goes along a lot with the typical corporate VC, corporate innovation, right? We're working on some interesting internal products, and that used to be all corporate VC. And obviously, Michael, you do some investing, so you get this. But lately, it's been like, yes, there's some interesting things internal that we will invest in. But really, the corporate VC model is, what's that interesting startup? What's that person that we should be partnering with or acquiring or, doing a joint venture with? And so I think some of it is driven by that. Yeah. And then, the Kohl's return your Amazon thing here, it makes sense. It's foot traffic. I think Wish.com is doing something super interesting where they're paying small businesses to actually become DCs for them. And not only are you a DC that's able to ship out local packages for Wish.com, with everything obviously coming over from China, like most of Wish.com stuff is. But because of the tariffs, it makes more sense for Wish.com to get to you that local general store, and that local general store to actually get it to people, or people come by and pick it up. And then the benefit I saw is that they're obviously paying these local stores to fulfill for Wish.com. But the local stores are all actually saying, well, you know what? That's actually a pretty cool item. I'm just going to buy that like I normally would and put it on my store shelves and see how it sells. So
Yeah.
I love all that stuff and try and keep on track of it. But again, long-term benefits, I think we're still trying to understand.
Yeah, one of the technologies that I think, has been talked a lot about over the last few years, but hasn't gotten a lot of traction, have been things like augmented reality and virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
And starting to see people kind of circle back to those now that customers are trapped at home. And how do you try to recreate some of that, physical experience? And I know people are working, with some of the, some of the 3D platforms to try to, kind of reinvigorate the idea of, rolling through shopping stores while you're sitting at home and, finding ways to really enhance that experience. So that'll be an interesting trend to keep an eye on in the near future.
I absolutely too. And there's some interesting companies out there doing good work, and like, well, great, but how do you actually put that in your e-commerce flow, right?
Yeah.
How do you run a test on, is this helpful or hurtful? Is this distracting from the customer to, build their virtual room in the middle of your checkout flow? Does it deserve its own place in the navigation? Is it prominent on your homepage? I think it's super interesting. The technology works. We can, see how this red a virtual item would sit in my room somewhere with our phones. But I think the e-commerce folks are just now getting in and thinking about companies like Vertebrae and others of like, how does this actually fit in my checkout, and how do I actually get people to take notice of it?
Yeah, I think the early uses, the try on your glasses with Warby Parker and others, and see it in my home with furniture retailers was a good foray. But I think there's potential for a lot richer experiences to be developed now and experimented with. But you're right, figuring out how and where to present those is going to be interesting. Let's talk about a few other leaders and what they're doing. Best Buy had amazing results in Q2 and Q3 this year, especially in online. In Q2, they saw 242% overall online growth and 5.8% in stores. Q3, they were up an additional 174% year over year in online sales, and they achieved 35% total revenue online. It's also worth mentioning that Best Buy has done a tremendous amount of work reconfiguring their stores to better handle same-day delivery, curbside pickup. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, they're doing a really fantastic job on the curbside service, including a really easy-to-use mobile experience that makes it pretty seamless. Over in the Middle East and Europe, companies like Carrefour are, accelerating their transition where they're, moving their physical stores into fulfillment centers and trying to meet the increased demand that we're seeing, globally for delivery services. So, what other ways are you seeing companies innovate around some of these new demands for consumers? Things like drive up or additional windows. How are fast food dealing with it? Pharmacy. There's so many innovative ideas out there.
It is. It's super interesting. I think I split that up in a couple of areas. One, to go back to kind of our startup talk from earlier. There's some great folks out there. Ambori is a company out of Sweden that's basically saying, the store of the future is now. Let's stop calling it store of the future. Let's instead call it what, Accenture's friends at Avanade call the intelligent store. And let's get rid of store of the future because that just throws people off. Instead, what is the intelligent store of next week, right? Not 5 years from now, the Jetsons, to our Elon Musk talk, right? He hasn't disrupted retail just yet.
Yes.
But what can we do now? And there's literally off the shelf things around queuing, maybe making your video analytics smarter with cameras, which is something that we're working on with Avanade a lot, right? And those cameras that have AI on board are not expensive anymore. And they're able to do people counting. They're able to tell how long people are queuing or how long they're waiting. They're able to tell when an employee approaches a customer and actually measure that interaction. And again, you could install those cameras next week, right? That's not store of the future anymore.
Yeah.
And also they make great loss prevention cameras and everything else. But there's companies like Digital Mortar, Ambori, my friends at Avanade and Accenture that are all working together to just think about intelligent store. Because you are having to set up curbside in 2 weeks. right? You're having to think about the customer experience when someone goes to a big box retailer or a home improvement store. And I give a lot of credit to the home improvement stores as well. I think they're doing a fantastic job. There's call to order, there's online pickup, there's order from the app. You drive up, they have signage, which a lot of people lack, of where to actually park, what your slot number is, what phone number to text or check in on the app, and actually have that order brought out to you. Or lockers, right? Super simple, easy to understand. But I'm going to get out of my car. I'm going to walk up. I'm in locker 17. Let me get my item out of it. So all of those things are complicated, as you know, from your retail experience, and I do, because of supply chain, ordering. Is it a third-party vendor? They told me that I was going to ship here, but it's going to ship 2 weeks late. But I think there's plenty of kind of off-the-shelf models and people that are diving into that and probably running pretty successful startups because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things, I've been in retail my entire life, and it's the thing that's most exciting is the store of the future is always tomorrow. It's always changing. And there's always fun stuff to try. So let's pick up the pace a little bit. We're coming up to the end here. So the fourth trend was consumer sentiment favoring big box brands right now. And this has been a really interesting one. Consumers, as we know, are exhausted from the effects of the pandemic, and they're looking for companies that can help make their lives easier and provide the kind of experiences that will take some of the agony out of shopping. It's become a really significantly more complicated task than it used to be. And we're seeing big box chains really being favored by consumers. Some of this is due to their ability to invest in meeting the demands of consumers and the ability to respond rapidly. Other parts of this transition were due to some of the necessary requirements that forced a lot of stores to close earlier in the year. Other companies like Walmart continue to see consolidation, with in-store shopping trips growing significantly larger in basket size, even though they're less frequent. Do you think this change to large retail is going to sustain, or are we going to see a recovery with small and mid-sized retailers, as things start to open up? To me, I think that's a concern for everybody. Small businesses are the engine of our economy, and it's a challenging time for them for sure.
It is. I think with the vaccine coming out, a return to normalcy, right? Small businesses are 44% of U.S. economic activity, according to the SBA. And I think of those small businesses, right, are under 20 to 40 employees. So they are suffering. And my hope is the people on this phone call are still shopping local and understanding local. I think big business is kind of winning right now because they are able to make those changes you and I talked about, right? Drive-through, pickup, add an extra drive-through lane, text to order. They're able to go do all that while your maybe local grocer is struggling through all of that to make that happen. But 44% of the U.S. economy, there's no way they're going away. There's no way that's changing in my mind too.
Yeah. I'm excited to see, small businesses get the opportunity to come back and thrive. And I think there's so much innovation that happens in local shops that it's going to be really exciting to see. So we are going to skip our fifth idea here, which was kind of the change in the promotional calendar because we're running out of time. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned, we will make available copies of all of the research reports. These are great topics, and we could probably talk for an hour or two on any one of these. So, David and I would, certainly welcome the opportunity to continue the discussion with any of you. And, I want to thank all of you for your time today and wish you a happy holiday.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. And please ask away. I saw there were some questions that we didn't get to. Shoot Michael an email, and then I'm at DaveIM on Twitter. So feel free to say hi and ask us those questions.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.